Creating these classes requires equipment and services that cost money. If you appreciate this education, please think about going to EliTheComputerGuy.com and offering a one-time or monthly recurring donation. Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to create users in MySQL and be able to assign them privileges. So essentially, privileges in the MySQL world are permissions, so you are going to be allowing your users to be able to do whatever it is that you want them to do. You can assign them all privileges so that they have the ability to insert, drop, update within your database server. You can assign specific privileges, so you can simply say, I only want this user account to be able to select. So imagine if you're creating a script, or imagine if you're giving user access to your database and you're saying, hey, I want you to be able to run reports, but I don't want you to be able to add anything, and I don't want you to be able to update anything. All I want you to do is be able to just run the reports. Then that's how you can assign privileges to allow people to only do the exact things that you want to do. One of the cool things in the MySQL world is you can really get relatively granular in the permissions that you are able to assign different users. So basically, you can give access to everything, all tables on all databases, and assign that to somebody. Or you can say all tables in a particular database. So we have in the lab that we've been doing, we have a class DB database, and then within that class DB database we have a users table. So we could say that this user has the ability to do whatever they want within any tables within the class DB database. That's one thing that you can do. You can assign just a table, so they only have access to one particular table. And one of the cool things is what you can actually also do where they can only have access to one column in one table. So this is one of those important things to be thinking about in the world of security. One of the reasons we have so many issues with hackers in the cybersecurity world is frankly a lot of our infrastructure is not built with the security that is already built into the system. Again, if you're thinking about doing something like a SQL injection attack and you're using some type of web page in order to try to hack into a database server, well, the fact of the matter is if you restrict the permissions so that the user account that script is attached to can only do select, or can even only do select on one particular column on one table, the fact of the matter is the attack surface that a hacker may go after just simply becomes a lot smaller. And so what I'm going to be showing you today is, again, how to create these user accounts, how to assign the privileges, and get a little bit into things like revoking privileges and that type of thing. So as I've said many times before, warning, Will Robinson, warning. So the things that I'm going to be teaching you today are a very small subset of the security that you're able to do in a MySQL database server. It is amazing, literally, how much security is actually built into a MySQL database server, and you could probably do a whole 10-hour class just going over all the different security features that are available. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be showing you a small subset of what you are able to do. This will allow you to be able to create user accounts, to be able to assign those user accounts permissions, be able to do all of these basic tasks. If you are interested in learning more about database security, obviously there is a lot more out on the web, and I will most likely be doing another video in the future. So again, if you're an old timer and you come in, you're like, Eli is barely scraping the surface of all the security that's possible with MySQL. You would be correct, because if I scraped more than the surface, a lot of people are going to get frustrated. Their heads are going to explode, and then they're going to go home. And I don't want people to give up on my watch. If you're going to give up later. Up later. When I'm teaching you, I'm trying to keep you in the loop. I'm trying to keep you feeling confident. But it is important to understand, again, if you think about putting a MySQL database server into what is called a production environment. So when we talk about a production environment, that's actually putting it into a server room. That's actually having your users be able to access it. And again, if your users are actually being able to access it, that means the internet, basically the network, is able to access it. If you're going to be creating a production server, do look more into security. Again, what I'm talking about today is very simplistic, and it might leave you open to possible hacking attacks if you don't lock down your server more. What I'm teaching you is great for the lab environment. Again, do some more research if you're actually going to put this into a server room. So now that I've given you the warnings and we've done the introduction, let's go over to the computer so I can show you how this stuff actually works. So here we are back at my lab system. Again, I'm using a MacBook Pro. I have VirtualBox installed on MacBook Pro. Within a virtual machine on VirtualBox, I have Ubuntu Desktop 18.04 because I want that graphical user environment. As we do more classes on this track, that GUI will be useful to us. And so basically, this is the environment that we're running in. I used TaskCell to be able to install the full LAMP stack, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And so with that, let's go down here, show applications. You go up to the search, you type in terminal, and then you open up the terminal. So now we are into the terminal, and at this point we are going to log in to MySQL. Again, if you are coming into this series brand new, I'm logging in a little bit differently than you normally should because we do not have user accounts created yet. I want to show how to create a database and a table and insert records and do all that kind of stuff before I got into the user accounts and before I got into the security. So if you're new to all this, if you have an actual user account that allows you to have all privileges within your MySQL database server, then log in the normal way. So the normal way of logging in would be MySQL space -u, username space -p. So that's how you normally log in to a MySQL database server. Again, we're not doing that because I have my own way of teaching. So we're going to do sudo MySQL 1 2 3 4 5 6 super secret password, and we are now in MySQL. So again, doing sudo MySQL, what this does is this logs us in as the actual root user. So we have full access to the database. So past this, what we're going to do is we're going to do Control L to clear everything out. So the first thing that we need to do is take a look at the users table. So if we do select, and then what we're actually going to do is we're going to select two columns out of the users table. We're going to select user, comma, and then host. So these are two different columns out of the user table within the MySQL database. So we're going to select the user column and the host column from MySQL.user, right? So MySQL is the database. So we have a MySQL database, and within the MySQL database is the user table. So this is default, right? So every single MySQL database server will have this, and so this is where the user account information is stored. Then we're going to do semicolon, gotta do semicolon, and then we're going to hit enter. So basically what we see here is we see user and we see host. We have Debian-sys, MySQL.session, MySQL.sys, and root. And you can see over here for host, we see localhost, right? And so host is one of those things we will get into more in a different class. This is important with security from a different standpoint. But the important thing to realize with user accounts, so like when you're logging in or when you're using a user account within the MySQL database server, basically your username and the host is combined in order to create your user account. So if you had Tim at localhost, that would be a different user account than simply Tim without any host, which would be a different user account than Tim at 192.168.1.4. So basically, when you're identifying user account, you have the username and the host come together to actually create that user account. So this is one of those things, again, it gets a little bit complicated. We are just going to be dealing with a local host for the host today, but it's something to keep in mind. So anyways, okay, so we can see we have user, we have root, and we have host. So the first thing that we want to do is we actually want to create a user now. So we are going to create a user Bob, right? Because hey, Bob has to be part of this MySQL server. So we're going to just simply create a user. So we're going to do create user, and then what we're going to do is we're going to do single quotation mark, Bob, close single quotation mark, at single quotation mark, localhost. Now do not fat finger this, make sure all of that is right. So we're going to create a user, so Bob, so that's going to be the username, and then host is going to be localhost. So Bob at localhost. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say identify by, and so what this is we're basically saying what the password for this user is. And so we're going to say identify by single quotation mark and then whatever your password is, 1 2 3 4 5 6, because I'm super cool with security that way. So create a user Bob at localhost identified by 1 2 3 4 5 6. Oh, remember do all those little single quotation marks or you'll run into problems. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do the semicolon and we're going to run. And then a query, okay, 0 rows affected, blah, blah. So we just go up. So select user host from MySQL.user, and then we hit enter. And then now we can see, so up at the top is Bob with the host of localhost. So we now have a Bob account here. So one of the things that we can do is we can look at what privileges this Bob account has. So we do Control L again. And so doing Control L clears a screen. And so now what we can do is we can do something called show grants. So show grants says, show me the privileges of a particular user. So show grants for, and then we say Bob at localhost, right? So show the privileges for Bob at localhost. And then we do semicolon. Then we hit enter. And so we say, grants for Bob at localhost. Grant usage on ***. So when we're looking at this, the first star here, basically when we're looking at the naming convention on a MySQL database server, the first part is the database itself. So the MySQL or class DB, whatever else. The database is first. Then you have a dot. And then after that is the tables. So MySQL.user is the user table in the MySQL database. Class DB.user is the user table in the class database. And so basically what we're saying here is grant usage. So usage basically just means you can log in on all databases and all tables to Bob at localhost. So that shows me what the privileges for this Bob account are. Now, if I'm logged in with a user account and I want to know what my particular privileges are, I can do show grants. And all I do is show grants. You don't have to do the for because you're logged in as you. Then I do semicolon. And then I hit enter, and so I can see who I'm logged in is. So grants for root at localhost, and so I have grant all privileges. So I have all privileges. All privileges is one of the privileges on ***. So all databases all tables to root at localhost. And then there's something here called with grant option. So basically what with grant option is that this user account is actually able to give privileges to other user accounts, right? So again, like with Bob, we're about to give privileges to Bob. The reason I'm able to give privileges to Bob is because I have this with grant option. Again, as I talked about before, when we start talking about permissions and all that, there are a crap ton of permissions. If we go over to the MySQL, dev.mysql.com, and we actually look at the privileges provided, we can go and we can see that there are just a crap ton. So there's all, alter, create role, create temporary tables, drop role, grant option, process, references, reload, super, trigger, update. And then you come down here to these other ones, set user ID, role admin, that kind of thing. And so the important thing to be thinking about with the privileges that we're going to be talking about today is we are only going to be giving the privileges that we have used up until this point. So we can do the insert privilege, we can do the update privilege, we can do the alter privilege, we could do the select privilege, right? So those are the basics, but if you want to get more into the weeds with it, just realize that there are a hell of a lot more privileges that you can actually give to user accounts. So now we have a Bob user. So all you have to do is, create user. We created the user. We now see what permissions, the privileges, the different user accounts have. So now I want to assign privileges to that Bob account. So let me do Control L again. So that is going to clear the screen. So now let's think about what privilege we want to give Bob on this particular server. So let's say we want to give Bob the select privilege to all databases, all tables on the server. So basically, Bob can go in and he will be able to run reports from any database and any table on the server. So what we're going to do is we're going to say grant select. So grant or the select, that's what actually allows you to be able to pull information out of a database. So we say grant select on ***. So basically on says what database, what table, star, so any. So we start with the databases. So any database dot any table, right? So we're going to grant the select privilege, and then we're going to say to Bob at localhost, and then we're going to close that with a semicolon. So grant select permission on all databases, all tables within those databases to Bob at localhost. Then we're going to hit enter, query OK. So now what I can do is I can do show grants for Bob at localhost. And what we can see here now is grants. So the grant selected, so select on all databases, all tables to Bob at localhost. So that is what permission he currently has. So now let's say, what if we want him to have some more ability? So let's say go in and be able to insert records. So we want Bob to be able to insert records within the class DB users table that we created before. So what we can do here is we can say grant insert on, and then we have that class DB that we've used in previous videos. So class DB, and then within class DB, there's a users table. So we want him to be able to insert records into the users table. And then all we do is we say to Bob at localhost, then we do semicolon. So now he will be able to insert records onto the users table of the class database. Okay, so then we do show grants for Bob at localhost. And so now we can see, so he can do select on any table of any database, but he is only able to insert on the users table within the class database. Now, what if we want him to do like updates? But we want to, it's like, you know what I'm saying? Like, okay, we want Bob to be able to update, but you always got to be careful about employees. We don't want them updating stupid things, right? So with that users table that we had before, we know that we have names, we know that we have ages, and we know that we have genders, right? So let's go in. We do use class DB, and then we can do describe users. So it's the users table, right? And so we pull this up, and so we can see what the users table is. So the user ID, this is the identifier for all user accounts. We do not want Bob to go anywhere near the user ID. If Bob screws up the user ID, he could screw up the entire database. No. Name. There's no reason that Bob should be able to modify a name within this table of database, right? Names aren't going to change. So that should stay as it is. And then you look and you go, age. Well, think about that. Like, kids grow older, right? So you may want Bob to be able to update the age of the people within the database. Gender, yeah, that's we're just gonna stay away from that one. We're just not gonna go there. So we take a look at it and we go, okay, what should Bob be able to update on this particular table? And so we say Bob should be able to update age, and that's it. So we'll do Control L to be able to clear the screen. And now what we're going to do is we're going to give him the update privilege, but only on the age column within the users table within the class database. So what we're going to do is we're going to say grant update. And then here we're going to do is open parentheses, and then we're going to say what column. So we're going to say the age column. So grant the update privilege. So the update privilege means you're able to modify a record. And then we're going to say on class db.users. So this is where the column is. This is where you define the database. And this is where you define the tables. Then all you do is you do to Bob at localhost. And then you do semicolon. And so this will grant Bob at localhost the ability to update the age of the users table in the class database. And nothing else at all. We hit enter. Thank golly. Again, when you're typing in all this stuff, it's really easy to fat figure things. So anyways, okay. So then what we're going to do is we're going to do show grants for Bob at localhost. Semicolon, enter. And so now we have grant select on star.star, so everything. Grant insert. So insert is for the entire users table of the class database. Update only the age column for the users table of the class database to Bob at localhost. So now you can see these are the permissions that Bob actually has. Now you sit here and you're like, oh, I don't know if I want him to be able to insert records, right? It's like, do I really want Bob to be able to insert records? That kind of makes me a little bit nervous. So why don't I revoke his ability to be able to insert records? We want Bob to be able to update the age within the users table, but we don't want Bob to be able to actually insert records into the users table. Maybe that was a dumb idea. So we'll clear the screen. And so now all we're going to do is we're going to simply revoke the permissions. So in order to revoke the privilege, all you do is you do revoke, and then you do insert, and then you say on, and then whatever it is. So class db.users, and then you say from, and then who you're getting it from. So Bob at localhost, right? Semicolon. So revoke the insert privilege on class.db users, so the users table within the class DB database, from Bob at localhost, and then we hit enter, query OK, 0 rows affected, blah, blah. And then what we can do here is now do show grants for Bob at localhost, semicolon, hit enter. And so now he has the selectability on all tables and all databases, but he now only has the updatability on the age column within the users table of the class DB, so the class database. And so that's how I showed you to create a user account. Then I showed you how to give privileges to that user account, and then I showed you how to revoke privileges from the user account. Again, when you want to take a look at all privileges, here's all the privileges. Here's all the privileges. But the main ones that you should be worried about at this time, again, is create, drop, delete, insert, select, or update, right? Then there's a final one called all privileges. So if we want to create a user account and give them all privileges, so this way they can do whatever they want, so they can update, they can delete, they can do everything. Let's create a new user. So let's say create user. Sue, let's call her Sue at localhost. So remember those single quotation marks. Identified by, and then super secret password 1 2 3 4 5 6, close, semicolon, right? So create user, single quotation mark, Sue, whatever the name of the user is, close single quotation mark, the @ symbol, opening single quotation mark, localhost, close single quotation mark, then identified by, this sets the password, single quotation mark, then whatever the password is, close single quotation mark, and then we do semicolon. Okay, so we now have a Sue. So if we do select user host from MySQL.user table, and then we do semicolon, we can see we now have a Bob account and we now have a Sue account, both at localhost. Now if I do I'll do Control L to clear the screen. So now I want to give all privileges to the Sue account. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to make Sue a super user account. So we're going to give her all privileges to all tables in all databases, and we're also going to do the with grant option. So that means that she's actually able to give privileges to other users within this database server. So what we're going to do is we're going to do grant all, and then we got to spell this, Privileges. I do have to say, I don't know what it is with privileges. I can just not spell privilege. It's kind of probably a weird joke in a way, but it's really hard to spell. I keep getting stupid on where the I's and where the E's are. But anyways, grant all so all privileges is basically, if you're used to the Windows world, this would be full control. Grant basically full control. All privileges on, and then we say what we want it on. We can do a single database, so we could simply do class, we could do on, we do class db dot star. So this will be within the class DB database. She would have all privileges and all tables within the class DB database. Or we could say the users table, so we can give her all privileges on the users table in the class DB database, right? We can do all that stuff. We're just gonna make this easy and just do good old-fashioned star. So all tables in all databases, obviously that means also on all columns. Then we're going to say to, and then we're going to say Sue at localhost host. So again, just saying who it is. And then from there, what we do is we type with grant option. Right, so with the grant option, this means this user account will be able to give privileges to other user accounts. So grant all privileges on all tables and all databases to Sue at localhost with the grant option. Then we're going to hit enter, and yay! Now she has all these privileges. So if we do show grants for Sue at localhost, we can see grant all privileges on *** to Sue at localhost with grant option. So now let's see about logging in. Let's try to log in as Sue, right? We've been logging in up until this point using the sudo way, the sudo MySQL that logs us in as the root account, but let's now start actually using a normal user account. So what we can do is we can just simply type in exit, and there we are. So this is back. We are now officially back at the Linux screen. Again, this is one thing that can be very confusing, especially for new people in the whole command line world, is knowing what command line you're in. When you see this MySQL, this means you're in the MySQL command line. When you see a prompt something like this means you're in the Linux command line. So just make sure you know what command line you're in. Anyways, past that, now what we're able to do is instead of doing sudo MySQL, the way we've been doing things in the past, now we can actually do MySQL space -u for username. We're just going to say Sue space -p to ask for a password. So we then hit enter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We hit enter, and now we are officially logged in. So Sue at localhost, so we are actually at the localhost. So all we had to do was type in Sue. Then we type in the password, and now we are in, and we can do all the normal stuff that we were doing before. So we can do show databases. We can see the databases. We can use class DB. So we're now in class DB. We can do select, let's see, all from users. Oh, it's an empty set. Well, never mind. I guess I got rid of all the user information in the user's account. But we could go back. So we could do select user from MySQL.user. So that's the MySQL database, the user table within the MySQL database. And so Sue actually has ability to look at that, hit enter, and so now Sue can see Bob and her own name, the whole 9 yards. Now, being logged in as Sue, let me do Control L again, clear the screen. I can also do the show grants, right? So this is going to be an important thing. Like, it's very important in the command line world and Linux and the MySQL world is knowing what permissions you have to do things. If you try to take actions and you do not have the proper permissions, then obviously it's not going to work. So doing things like show grants is a useful tool just to make sure you have the permissions you think you have. So I can do show grants, and now again, when you do show grants, just show grants, not show grants for, when you just do show grants, that will show you what your privileges are. So we can see, okay, Sue, I'm logged in as Sue, I have all privileges on all databases, tables, and obviously columns with the grant option. So the final thing that I have to show you is simply how to be able to delete a user. Or again, in the MySQL world, we will be dropping a user. So let me clear the screen. And then the first thing we need to do is select user host from MySQL.user table. Right? So this is going to show us all the users and the host. So remember, when we're doing something like dropping, we need to connect the username and the host, and that all becomes one identifier that we're going to be using. So let's say we're sitting here and we're logged in as Sue, so we can't get rid of Sue, but we do have Bob, right? So let's get rid of Bob. Sue never really liked Bob. So what we can do is we can simply do drop, and then we say user, and then we say Bob at localhost. And then we do semicolon, and this will get rid of Bob. And it's query OK, 0 rows affected, blah, blah, blah. So then we do select, and then user host from MySQL.user table. And there we go. So now Bob is gone. And the other important thing to realize here is, again, we are still logged in as the Sue account. So Sue, because we gave Sue all privileges, Sue is able to do things such as be able to drop Bob from the MySQL table. So again, so Sue was given all privileges to all databases, all tables. So the MySQL database, that database is just a normal database. The users table within that database is just a normal users table. So since I did star, that means her user account is actually able to delete users out of that particular table. Again, this is something where you really have to be thinking from a security standpoint. Do you really want to give anybody all privileges to star? Again, maybe the administrator account, right? If you have a super user account, you want to give them all privileges to star. But this is an example of why you really need to think about it and say, well, no, I want to give all privileges to class DB.star. So all tables within the class DB database. So some of those things to think about. So now you know how to create a user, you know how to give privileges to everything, to a single database, to a single table within a database, even to a single column within a table, within a database. I've shown you how to be able to revoke those privileges. I've shown you how to see the privileges. Again, show grants will show you what privileges you have. And then I've shown you how to drop, basically be able to delete a user. And so this is the basics of what's required for user accounts and security in the MySQL world. So there you go. Now you know how to create users, you know how to give them privileges, you know how to revoke their privileges, you know how to give them, rather refined privileges all the way down to a single column on a single table in a single database. And so this can be very valuable. Again, this is an important thing to be thinking about from a security standpoint, especially when you start creating scripts. Basically, you start creating those front ends to be able to interact with your MySQL database. Is remember, again, if a hacker tries to use something like what's called a SQL injection attack or different types of attack, if the user account that they're essentially trying to hijack simply doesn't have the permissions to do the attacks that they're trying to do, it's going to fail out. Again, like if you create a front end and all that front end is going to do is it's going to pull a report from a particular table within your database, then why in the hell would you give the user account that script is going to use the permission to insert or the permission to update or the permission, holy hell, to drop, right? If you're going to have a front end and all it's going to do is be able to pull a report, then basically give that front end, basically the user account that front end is using, give it the permission to be able to do select statements on a specific table in a specific database, and that's it. Even if a hacker is able to compromise your script, that front end, and be able to try to do some kind of injection attacks or something else, it's just not going to work because literally that user account is not going to have the permissions. So these are some things to be thinking about. Now, a final thing. Again, I was talking about these different users. Again, where you can have Tim as a user, and you can have Tim at localhost as a user, and Tim at something else as a user. Let me just go back to the computer again, just to kind of show you how you can create a bit of a mess with this. That's something that we will talk about in the future. If you're going to be creating user accounts right now, simply create the name at localhost and go from there. But I do want to show you where there can be a bit of a mess, especially if you're coming in behind somebody else and they've created user accounts on your MySQL database server. I want to show you why there might be a few problems. So let's go back to the computer again for a second. Okay, so let's clear the screen and let's create a couple of user accounts, right? So we're going to do this. Let's say for Nancy, we're going to create a user Nancy. So let's say create user single quotation mark, and all we're going to do this time is we're going to do Nancy, and then we're going to do identified by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? So again, notice there is no at localhost here. There is nothing else. We're simply going to create a user Nancy identified by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we're going to do the semicolon, 0 rows affected. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create user, and then we're going to do Nancy again, but then we're going to add at localhost. Again, got to do those single quotation marks. And then for this, we're going to be identified by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then we do semicolon, hit enter. Okay, 0 is affected, so that's also there. And let's say create user Nancy at 192.168.1.2 identified by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Right, so these are 3 different Nancys. So we're gonna hit enter. Okay, so all of those went through. And so this is one of those things where you have to be looking at that host. When you do a select from the user table within the MySQL database, you also try to grab the host information, because if all we do here is we just simply do select user from MySQL.users table, user table, we do semicolon, then what we're going to see is we actually have 3 different Nancys here. And again, life can get really miserable, because remember, these are entirely different accounts. So you can put different privileges on these different accounts. And so that's why it's important that you understand that the actual identifier for a user within MySQL is the username plus the host. So if you do select, and then we do user, comma, host, from MySQL.user table. Now we can see, so Nancy, so this is user Nancy, host, this little percent sign, basically it means this user account can log in from anywhere. So with MySQL, what's kind of really cool is you can log in at the local host. You can actually log in remotely, so you can log in from somewhere else. So what we have here is this person can log in from anywhere. They can log in from localhost, they can log in remotely, whole 9 yards. This Nancy here, this Nancy is actually only able to log in from the IP address 192.168.1.2. So if you want somebody to have remote access to be able to manage this particular database and information within the database, you can actually give Nancy the host name of 192.168.1.2. So Nancy will be able to log in, but only from that IP address. Or then we have Nancy down here, and then Nancy is only able, this Nancy is only able to log in locally. But the important thing here is these different Nancy accounts, they can have different passwords, they can have different privileges. Basically, they're entirely different accounts. So you do have to be careful about this. The other thing that makes this all really squirrely, and again, why I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with this, is now you're sitting there going, okay, well then if they can only log in remotely, or if they can only log in from a particular IP address, you know, how does that work for security when it comes to things like scripts, or how does it come in with SSH? And that's where you start getting into weird things with this. Again, you have to think about like these technologies and these products and these security. So if you log in with SSH, you can use a local host user account to log in with SSH, because SSH is essentially, even though you're remotely connecting locally, and so once you're in SSH, you're local, so the local host works. Again, if you're using a script with permissions, that's actually happening locally. So even though, yeah, it is kind of sort of remote, as far as the MySQL database server is concerned, it's actually local. So when you're looking at this is using the MySQL server being able to log in to a remote database server. So again, this gets a bit squirrely. The main thing that I want to show you is that there is this possibility. So if you're running into weird things with usernames, it might be that you actually have multiple accounts that you, and again, you're logging in, you know, under weird circumstances. So this is just something to keep in mind. Again, if you run into this problem, do a little bit more research on it. We'll talk about it in another video, but this can be a bit confusing. And so there you go. Now you know the whole creating users, dealing with privileges, the whole 9 yards on a MySQL database server. Again, there is a lot that can go into this, but for your particular level, understanding what I showed you today will make your life easier. Again, whenever you're going to be creating user accounts, where you're at now, I would argue you should create those local host accounts. So, you know, single quotation mark Bob, close single quotation mark at, single quotation mark localhost, close single quotation mark identified by. Again, you can create user accounts for specific IP addresses. You can create user accounts where people can log in remotely. But if you do that, you might start running into some weird problems when you try to do things like logging in. It was kind of interesting because I've been hammering the hell out of this little MySQL database server in order to do these classes, right? So I create user accounts, and I delete user accounts, and I create all kinds of, and yeah, I found some weird places. I found some weird places where if you screw around with the user table too much, your user accounts actually won't be able to log in to the MySQL database server, and you run into some problems that way. There are some interesting things if you go and you do some further research about how MySQL actually parses that users table for when people try to log in, and how that whole password process works. And all I'll say is if you start dumping too much into the users table, you start doing a lot of modifications, that type of thing, you could run into some real quirks. And so if you get to the point where for some reason the user account that you created is not able to log into your database server, what I would argue that the simple way to troubleshoot it at this point, since this is all lab, is basically delete all the user accounts that you created and then recreate the user accounts, and it should be able to fix the problem. But if you're dealing with a real production server, you may have to do some Google searching. Just realize the issue that you may run into is there's this, basically how MySQL parses that table when you go to log in. You can run into some really weird, quirky problems there. So just one of those things to keep in mind. So now you know a little bit about security. Go play. Make sure, again, if you're using VirtualBox or whatever, clone your machine, clone your MySQL database server before you go to play. Go play, start messing around with accounts, start messing around with privileges, see what you're able to do, see what you're not able to do. Because again, this type of security would solve so many problems. Again, you hear about like how we need more cybersecurity experts. A lot of people say we need more cybersecurity experts. I say we need better administrators. Again, good security is a byproduct of good administration, right? So when you're building out your infrastructure, it's just thinking about basic things. Again, if you have a front end where people are going to be pulling reports from your database server, just simply ask yourself, why would you give the user account that is accessing your MySQL database server, why would it have the ability to update? Why will it have the ability to drop? Why would it have the ability to do anything other than select on the specific tables that you give it permission to select? Right? The big problem with security is that people just do piss poor administration. Again, you create a user account that has all privileges within your database, and then you have your users using a front end, and all they're doing is pulling a report. But if a hacker is able to get in, and basically they're able to hijack that session, they're able to hijack the communication, they could then start inserting records, updating records, dropping records, because the user account that you're using has the permission, has the privilege to do that. That is why the hacker is able to do the things that they are. If you simply revoke all of those privileges from the user account that's accessing the database server, then the hacker, again, even if the hacker is able to hijack the credentials, is able to hijack that user account in order to get to the database server, it doesn't matter, because literally the only permission that user has is the ability to select. Or again, like I say, if you're going to update, again, minimizing the risk. If you're going to have a front end, or if you're going to have a user account, and again, they need to update specific columns within a table, then only give them permission to update those specific columns. So they are able to update, the age column, and that's it. They shouldn't be updating names. They shouldn't be updating genders, right? Name and gender should be, that's his own story. But basically, those should be permanent. The only person that should be able to tweak age or gender is maybe some true super user that can go in and modify things on a case-by-case basis. But in general, a standard user account should be able to modify the ages, and that's it. So again, if a hacker gets in and they start getting stupid, maybe they can screw around with people's ages, which again would suck. I'm actually not trying to. If somebody went in and completely screwed up all the ages for all the people in your user's database, it may take a while to clean that up, but it's not going to be catastrophic, right? When so many times when we see the hacking attacks that are catastrophic against database servers, it's simply because the permissions that were provided to that front end interface were so wide. They were granted so much that when the hacker was able to get in, they were able to grab everything. So these are some of the things you really need to be thinking about again, and especially when you start thinking about putting something into a production environment, really think about what the user accounts actually need. What do they need? And really refine it down, again, down to the columns. Think about that even with like select, again, specific tables, specific only being able to pull information from specific columns. So why, if you have social security numbers, if you have credit card numbers, why would a front end be using a user account that even has the ability to be able to select and be able to read credit card information? You should simply revoke that, right? Again, it can select names, maybe it can select addresses, something like that, but credit card information and social security numbers and that type of thing, that shouldn't even be accessible from the user account that front end is using. So these are some things to be thinking about when you're building out your infrastructure, when you're building out your system. Again, go play with it. There are a hell of a lot of privileges out there. Again, MySQL database server is actually a very sophisticated piece of software. So there are a lot of privileges out there. There's a lot of things that you can do. But for you in general, all privileges. So if you grant the all privileges, that gives the ability to create, drop, delete, insert, select, and update. So those are the standard privileges that a normal person is going to use. And then you have those privileges. And then with what's called the with grant option. So with grant option allows that user account to be able to give permissions, privileges to other user accounts. So that's added on the back. So there you go. There are some things. Hope it all makes sense. Hope it all makes sense. When you get to security, when you get to things like user accounts and security, that's an easy way to lose people. So we will talk about this more in the future. Again, we'll talk about more about hardening the database server. We'll talk about those remote accounts and those types of things. But with what I showed you right now, you should be able to start and be able to play around with your MySQL database server and actually do some interesting things. So as always, I enjoy doing this video and look forward to seeing you on the next one. Apparently, the type of content you just saw is not what Susan W. wants for the future of YouTube. This means that recommendations by YouTube to this channel have dropped massively and views are becoming comically small. I hate to ask. I used to say I would never ask, but if you could subscribe, like, comment, and most importantly, share the videos that you appreciate, that may help slow the death of this channel. Do remember that if anything at all happens to this channel, you can go to EliTheComputerGuy.com to view the content and access information not available on YouTube.